Thanks everyone for coming to this joint IPSI and SME for Labour event. Sorry we're running a bit late. We'll probably try and cut it to 25 to 4 after this one and just go on slightly later ourselves. So we're here today to talk about the state of self-employment as we emerge from the pandemic and the gaps in government support for freelancers over the last year and a half. I'm Tristan Grove from IPSI, the trade body for self-employed people. And I'm joined here today by Bill Esterson, who is a Labour MP for Sefton Central, Shadow Minister for International Trade, former Shadow Minister for Business, and also a member of the Gaps in Support APPG. I'm also joined on my left by Sonali Joshi, who is the founder of Excluded UK and is a freelance film curator, writer, and distributor. She's also the founder of Day and Night, which supports underrepresented cinemas and filmmakers. And finally, I'm also joined by Rebecca Seeley-Harris on my right, who is a leading campaigner for support for excluded groups during the pandemic. She masterminded one of the main methods proposed for supporting limited company directors, the Directors' Income Support Scheme, and she's also an independent employment status and tax expert. So, as we at IPSI said regularly in our campaigning for freelancers, the pandemic isn't just a health crisis, it's also an income crisis for the self-employed. Our research has shown that 2 out of 3 freelancers took a financial hit because of the pandemic, and almost half of those saw their income cut by over 40%. 1 in 10 even lost 90% of their turnover overnight. At the start of the pandemic, IPSI and other groups quickly pushed for an emergency support fund for freelancers. The government responded with the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme. Though the scheme gave support to as many freelancers, it's not what we called for. It missed out major groups like people who are new to self-employment and freelancers working through limited companies. On our estimate, there are up to 3 million self-employed people and others who are left with little to no support for the last year and a half. So Excluded UK, Forgotten Limited, and IPSI and other groups campaigned for change. But again and again, government ignored the calls for better. The only real improvement the scheme has seen was at the start of this year, people who became self-employed in 2019 to 2020 could finally access it. The remaining excluded groups were left to burn through their savings and rely on universal credit to get by. Others were driven into debt, either through the government bounce back loan scheme or through overdrafts and credit cards. Our research found over 1 million freelancers were driven into debt during the pandemic. The self-employed sector, which has been continuously growing through most of the 21st century, has been left undermined, and hundreds of thousands of freelancers in all parts of the economy have seen their businesses scuppered and their finances devastated. So now we're here today to look at what exactly went wrong, why these groups were left out, and what we can change to support freelancers better and make sure this never happens again. We're going to start with an introduction from each of our experts, and then I've got a few questions for each of them, and then I'll open up to the floor. So please do be thinking of questions before that's okay. Bill, would you like to start?
Yeah, thanks very much, Tristan. Great to see you all here today, and big thank you to IPSI for all the work you do on behalf of freelancers and the way you advocate for such an important part of our economy. And a big thank you to all of the groups during this crisis. You have done some sterling work in raising the plight of people who have been excluded from support by the government. Now, I am not just a member of the Gaps in Support APPG, I'm now co-chair of it as of 2 weeks ago. And I've taken done as much as I can to support through the crisis, not least because, yes, I was a Shadow Business Minister, I still am a Shadow Trade Minister, but I was around business for 15 years. My wife still does. She's a company director, and I've seen what happens twice now when your work collapses completely. Absolutely to my wife during the pandemic, the millions of people as well, but it happened to us in the financial crisis. We lost all of our trade overnight then, and we didn't have support then either. And this was so much worse than anything that happened to businesses actually during the financial crisis. So I cannot imagine for people who didn't have a well-paid spouse to support them, which is what's happened in our family, how people have survived, except I can, because I've had lots of constituents, lots of people around the country telling me. I've raised this a number of times with government, and Rishi Sunak told me on one occasion that the government support through the crisis has been generous. Try telling that to one of my constituents. Try telling her the government support has been generous. This is a constituent who was paid £10 more in employed income than in self-employed income in the previous year before the crisis. And that meant she didn't qualify for any financial support whatsoever. And that applies to self-employed people, small business owners, to the freelancers, whether running limited companies or not. You mentioned, Tristan, people who didn't have business premises, people on short-term contracts, people who changed jobs at the wrong time, and many women having a baby. And no decent justification has ever been given for not giving self-employed income support to recently self-employed people or those with profits over £50,000 hasn't been given to the other groups I mentioned either. There was no 80% furlough for the, I'm using the figure of 3.8 million who were excluded from government backing. Meanwhile, sick pay and self-isolation payments have been woefully inadequate, with only 1 in 8 people qualifying. So let's go back to March 2020. The Chancellor initially refused to introduce furlough, despite the evidence from other countries. He refused until the combination of the Labour Party, trade unions and the business community put so much pressure on, he had no choice. Remember last August, when it was the North that had been in lockdown for an extended period with stubbornly high infection rates? Chancellor wasn't so generous then, was he? He was only prepared to deliver furlough at 2/3 of pay. That is until South London caught up. To be generous, you have to be generous of spirit. And I don't think there's any way you can describe Rishi Sunak and the Tories as being generous of spirit in the way that they have treated people who are self-employed, people who lost their job at the wrong time, or who run small businesses. My office, throughout this crisis, had a constant stream of self-employed, small business owners, and people who lost their jobs at the wrong time coming to us asking for help, desperate for help. Creative businesses, photographers, music teachers, all came to my office. My staff have never been busier in my 11 and a half years as an MP. And we were able to help with small amounts of discretionary support. But that's only because we had a council and a metro mayor who wanted to put that help in, who were prepared to find ways of helping despite the restrictions of the government schemes that you described earlier, Tristan. The Liverpool City region has added over £50 million in grants for those excluded from government schemes. That's despite 11 years of cuts to local government and a broken promise from the government to reimburse all COVID-related costs. Nothing generous there either about a government attitude to local councils. We couldn't support everyone by any means, but my colleagues in local government tried, and my staff had a brilliant response from council officers doing their best with very scarce resources. Those small grants have gone a long way. It was a matter of priority, and our priority absolutely was to support constituents where we could. So what now? I don't believe for 1 minute the pandemic is over. So sick pay, self-isolation payments and financial support for those unable to trade or work has been missing through the crisis. We must and we will continue to make the case for them to be paid at a livable rate. And that means no cut to the universal credit uplift. Cutting universal credit at a time when we're facing fuel and food shortages and higher prices shows an unbelievable disregard for ordinary people, especially those who've had nothing else through the pandemic. And of course, if you're a company director paying dividends, you didn't get universal credit anyway. Practical support now, what does that look like? Well, I think that means rent, rates, COVID loans, VAT, all being deferred until payments can be afforded. It's a false economy to demand repayments before they can be afforded. The alternative is bankruptcy and insolvent businesses who will never pay back the borrowing. And let's remind ourselves that there was plenty of money for Matt Hancock's pub landlord, for Andrew Mills of the Board of Trade, that Tory councillor in Wiltshire, was it? All of whom, and he's ended up at the mansion, hasn't he, remember, as a result of it, all of whom were given hundreds of millions of pounds of PPE contracts with zero experience for the manufacture or supply of PPE. While constituents of mine, people up and down the country, were having to lay off staff because the government wouldn't give them a contract. And by the way, that's all dwarfed by the 37 billion test and trace budget, which alongside the waste of public money on unusable PPE, which is estimated at 2.8 billion and counting, shows the sharp contrast between the treatment of Tory donors and friends and millions of ordinary business people and employees. Value for money in public contracts, the use of public money to support local businesses, jobs and communities. It could and should have been very different to the economy, and it can be as we recover. So Labour will continue to stand with those who want to get on, but could not earn a living in the pandemic. And for that recovery, Labour in local government will show the way. In my region, we have a £150 million COVID recovery fund, working with the private sector, using the regional expertise that we have in the renewable energy industry. And that means 6,000 jobs, a combination of hydrogen to replace natural gas in industry, to increase our already impressive wind farm output, and the prospect of a tidal barrage in the River Mersey. They'll all drive economic growth through the economy, through supply chains, including and especially to those who've been excluded, and will deliver opportunities to succeed as we emerge from the pandemic. And as part of that COVID recovery fund, there is also going to be investment in key parts of our regional economy, which is the hospitality and visitor economies, and our vibrant and previously highly successful creative and media sectors, which of course are where very many of those excluded from support their livings. Labour has supported the excluded groups during the crisis, will be there for you for the recovery. Investment in the future, support in the present. That's what generous really means. The Tories are all talk and no action. Only Labour will take the action needed. Only Labour will deliver across the country what we're already delivering in the Liverpool City region.
Thank you very much. And we'll now get to Sonali from Excluded.
Thank you. Excluded UK is a grassroots volunteer-run not-for-profit organisation established in May 2020 in response to the financial challenges faced by individuals and businesses entirely or largely excluded from government COVID-19 financial support. And I'm one of the original founders of the organisation. Our work encompasses various areas: lobbying and campaigning, policy and research, and support. We act as a support mechanism in terms of member welfare. We offer business guidance and debt support, all things that have become so much needed by this community of people. These are people who've been affected across all employment statuses. I know here today we're talking about the self-employed, but I would just like to emphasise that there are other groups that have also been excluded, although the majority of the 3.8 million figure, approximately 75% based on the figures that we have from our research, fall within the broad area of self-employed freelancers and small limited companies. So what we've seen are significant disparities in the support that has reached people during the pandemic. And this has resulted in severe hardship for all of those who've been excluded from support. There are certain groups that have been completely disproportionately affected: younger workers, older workers, those shielding, new parents, among others. And these exclusions are multiple, they are complex, and within each broad category of exclusion, there are many other subcategories. This cannot be mere oversight on the part of the Treasury. We believe that these are active and arbitrary policy decisions that were taken by government. We assessed initially that there were in the region of 3 million people affected, and we based this on detailed analysis of ONS figures and HMRC figures. This has since been backed up by the National Audit Office, which published a report in October pointing to 2.9 million who've been affected. But we think that that figure didn't actually encompass those who were largely excluded. It was primarily those entirely excluded. Standard Life Foundation conducted a survey earlier this year and did some very detailed analysis which pointed to 3.8 million. And further to that, we dug deeper into the figures and we do believe that the figure is much closer to 3.8 million. So the majority who are affected are freelancers and the small business community. Our work, as I've said, we support all of those who have been excluded. And the consequences have been devastating and far-reaching. These are people who were largely self-sufficient, people who were not necessarily high earners, people who have not necessarily had to rely on the welfare state before. But here they found themselves in a situation that they never could have anticipated and never envisaged. If I can just give you a broader snapshot of who these people are, we're talking about beauticians, businesses relating to animals, charity workers, art, dance, music teachers, healthcare workers, arts and theatre professionals, film and TV professionals, plumbers, electricians, builders, the list goes on. To put some of this into a bit of context, we conducted our latest survey at the end of August, beginning of this month. And we're just in the process of finalising our report on that, which is due to be published shortly. But I can highlight a few of the standout figures that came from that. And this is 18 months on. 47% of those respondents said that they are facing household income of less than 20,000. That's total household income, £20,000. 52% are saying that now 18 months on, their personal income is actually less than £10,000. In our very first survey conducted back in May and June of last year when we first set up, we saw that 72% of those who responded to the survey were on less than 20% of their pre-COVID income, bringing together every element of their personal income. So we're 18 months on now, and the impacts are profound and they are only becoming more acute as time passes. Mounting debt. So our latest survey says that 52% of people have had to rely on debt, and that is primarily credit card debt and bounce back loans. And that's bounce back loans for those who were able to access them. We know that many people couldn't access them. We're facing a mental health crisis. This has been looming large since the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm talking about people who are facing this kind of spiralling debt and the wider impacts that that's had on their children, their families, supply chains, businesses in peril for their employees. Careers have been damaged. Businesses are folding. Around 12% of those who we recently surveyed said that they'd had to liquidate their limited companies. People have been losing homes, they've been selling belongings. There are all manner of impacts on people's day-to-day lives and livelihoods. And for those who had to pay their tax bills in January and July of this year, this has been a really bitter pill to swallow. Having to pay tax with their decimated incomes in the midst of the pandemic, but based on their pre-COVID incomes. And 18 months on, the Treasury has not worked out a solution, despite all of the work that has gone on from so many quarters. The things that we've done over the past 18 months range from securing extensive media coverage and press coverage. We've positively engaged with many, many MPs, and Bill has been incredibly supportive throughout the whole campaign from the outset. We've had so many parliamentary questions put forward from all sides of the House. We initiated the Gaps in Support APPG. We've conducted 4 surveys each quarter over the last year, just about, and reports from those surveys and wider briefings that we've published and also sent out to all MPs on the ongoing impacts. We've hosted and facilitated roundtables with MPs, and we've also enabled group meetings for constituents to meet with their MPs. And that has been quite instrumental in gathering more support from MPs around the country, because what we found is that when individual constituents have engaged with their MPs, on many occasions they're met with a brick wall. So we've been able to facilitate more of these conversations, which are absolutely instrumental in digging deeper into the situation and trying to find ways forward. We've submitted oral and written evidence to select committees and various independent inquiries. And we've also held joint events with numerous other unions and industry bodies, including IPSI and many others, all in our effort to strengthen our collective voice. We've also more recently helped numerous individuals appeal against refused additional restrictions grants applications from their local councils. We've provided mental health support and most importantly on a kind of day-to-day basis, a safe space for those affected to lean on us and lean on each other. And yet despite all of this, there's been no shift from the Treasury. So there is still vital work that needs to be done to push for change. So where do we go from here? Throughout the campaign, parity in support has been the overriding call from the community of those affected. But in addition, we really want to push for deeper systemic change. As I've alluded to already, one of the gravest consequences has been debt. So debt relief is something that we want to start exploring and talking about more. The welfare system has not provided a safety net. When we first surveyed the excluded community, we found that around I think it was over 60% of respondents simply could not even access universal credit. So there needs to be reform whereby, well, the welfare system is fit for purpose in such scenarios. We're supporting the Living Income campaign. We're continuing to campaign around IR35, which is going to continue to be a major issue. And we also feel that there should be some form of post-COVID support funding of some nature, ongoing help to enable people to reach the other side in better financial shape. Investment for new businesses where people can start afresh with new business ideas. And we're not talking about anything on the lines of the Future Fund, which was put forward by the government early on, where £250,000 of investment had to be secured in the first place. We want to see creation of routes back to work, upskilling and training. And above all, we want to call for a public inquiry to prevent any recurrence of this kind of situation again. We want to see people lifted out of debt and poverty and help them achieve financial stability and repair the damage caused by 18 months of little to no support.
Thank you very much, Sally. I now pass over to Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you, Esme, for and IPSI for inviting me to talk at this event. For me, this isn't new. This is something that has been going on for a very, very long time, and the pandemic has really shone a light on the problem of all those who are not permanently employed. I don't use the word self-employed because it kind of confuses the whole issue. You've got freelancers, self-employed, agency workers, umbrella company workers, intercompany directors. There are so many people in this sector. I've been in the sector for over 20 years now. I'm in the employment stage sector. I work across tax and employment rights, so I know the field. Specifically started with the PCG, for those that remember, with IR35 as it was then, specifically with the linked company directors, but obviously also working with any client or body that works with those people that are not on payroll. I've also been a senior policy advisor, so I've worked with the government, specifically the Office of Tax Simplification, reviewing small company taxation to try and simplify it. The government have had a lot of research done and advice given on how to rectify the problems and deal with the taxation issues that they don't like, for example, incorporation. I was asked specifically to look at whether there could be a situation of limited liability for a main asset for self-employed, so they didn't have to incorporate. Incorporation brings with it a lot of difficulties, but also prejudice. And I think that prejudice is brought about every time somebody says those directors who pay themselves in dividends, which was reported every time during the COVID pandemic by the media. I myself am a director of my one-woman limited company and have been so for I think probably 10 years. I was self-employed before that, because I needed limited liability. The kind of work I do, I just wasn't happy with relying on professional indemnity insurance, because I don't think it's a fair and safe space. You need a limited company. But I am very well aware of the prejudice against me because of that. Because people compare apples with pears, and they seem to think that if you're working through a limited company, somehow you're cheating the treasury. So, from my position with understanding the limited company directors and self-employed, when it came to the pandemic, first of all, I was directly affected when R35 was postponed, which was absolutely fantastic for my clients, but most of my projects got canned overnight. So I was affected by it. I mean, I'm lucky that I have the right business, but that did give me the opportunity to look at the situation, look at what was going on with the directors, and then I spoke to a bit of government. At that time, I was told that the government were looking for a solution. So, having been a senior policy advisor with a background in law, I thought, well, I can draft a policy to help the government to understand how they can help. So, my policy didn't concentrate on dividends, it looked at trading profits, which equated it to the self-employed saves scheme. So I believe it was a viable policy that the government could work with. We worked directly with the Financial Secretary of the Treasury, Jesse Norman, as then he's gone now, apparently because of diversity. So we worked directly with him and also Treasury officials and HMRC officials. We had, which was probably and media, a lot of meetings and a lot of. Do you want to close their door instead? It's only because of COVID. So we worked with the Treasury and with HMRC, and there was a lot of communication, but fundamentally I believe that the political will was not there. So there was a solution. It probably could have worked. If they'd followed the example of the Northern Ireland administration, they could have given a flat grant, which is what Northern Ireland did for the directors and for the newly self-employed. At that point, then I thought, I think I was told actually that if a flat grant system was created, then the government might follow it. So I created the targeted income grant scheme. Ticks. Actually named after my kids. And I was outed on LBC because Eddie Mayer said to me, "What's your cat's name?" Anyway, so I drafted this policy, which then incorporated the limited company directors, the newly self-employed, the PAYE freelancers, the 50-50 group, the over 50 group, to try and provide a structured policy system that the government could follow. It was clear, all the evidence was there, all they needed to do was try and put something in place. They didn't. Again, we had lots of meetings. It was difficult because Treasury were correct that they were meeting with myself mainly, and also FSB were involved and got limited CCA. But ultimately, I think again the political will wasn't there to help these groups because they felt they were helping out, and that there was going to be some collateral damage, which is a very strange situation. It's a very strange response when you've got a global pandemic and there are people who are evidently really suffering. And I know people who have been in live events and are still suffering now. They've gone through all their savings, the house has been sold, and they're depressed and they're really struggling. So after TIGS, we got to the March budget, and then I think they're at 600k. And I think we all campaigned it, we all worked really, really hard to try and make a difference, but there was no will there to make a difference. As far as I'm concerned now, the thing is it's wider than the excluded. This problem's been existing for a very long time. The self-employed sector is misunderstood, it's misrepresented, it's treated as an underclass as far as I'm concerned. But you've got some brilliant people out there who have been brave enough to go out on their own, and there's no safety net. And this is what the problem is that the economists are talking about, you need to have equality of taxes across because we're all supplying labour. They do not understand what it's like. You don't have that safety net. You don't have that safety net when you have this kind of pandemic. The government did support some of the self-employed, but not all of them. Despite the fact that there are nearly 45 million at any one time of the self-employed, that's another problem that we have. The data's not correct. We don't have enough data on this field. And I have repeatedly asked the government on that. There's also generally low morale in people who just feel that they are disregarded and there's no trust in them, which is a very strange thing to feel that your government doesn't put any trust in you when you're working hard. There's also bigger problems, the gig economy with the work status. I know that Labour have now backing the single worker status. I don't know whether that's in cooperation with Lord Kennedy, who's put a bill through. It's now in the House of Lords anyway. So there's single worker status instead of having employee and worker. But you've still got a tax situation at the present where you've got workers who have basic employment rights, but they're paying taxes self-employed. Of course, we have the off-payroll ridiculous situation, and I have to mention the HGV fuel prices. The drivers, one of the problems, along with Brexit and COVID, was IR35. They do not want to work in a situation where they don't know what their status is. So it's been incredibly difficult for the self-employed HGV drivers to actually be watching the situation. Nobody seems to be reporting on that, but that is one of the problems. Another problem which I'm also campaigning on is the umbrella company workers. There's no regulation in that industry, and IR35 has pushed more workers into umbrella companies, and these workers are being abused. So it's a huge problem outside of the excluded. What can Labour do? They need to understand the self-employed market. I don't believe either party does actually. I think there needs to be an acceptance that they are not some kind of underclass. It's almost like, you can't get a job, so you go self-employed. There just needs to be more support that the self-employed know that they're being supported. They need to make some fundamental changes to tax status so that the self-employed or anyone in that industry knows and has certainty about what their tax position is. And this goes for the clients as well, having to now deal with payroll, which is a ridiculous situation. They don't know until they go through the whole court system what their tax status is going to be. There's been a case last week in the Court of Appeal about football referees. The Professional Game Match Officials Limited, who supply football referees at national level, the first two tribunals said that they were self-employed. The Court of Appeal have now turned around and said, well, we're not sure whether they are or not. The Court of Appeal doesn't even understand it. So it's gone back to first to a tribunal. But these football referees and these companies have had years of going through an HMRC investigation just to figure out what their status is. At the end of it, there's going to be £500,000 worth of tax if they've got it wrong. That's a very big error, but it's not there. So anyway, to go off my soapbox, ultimately, I think it needs to be acknowledged that some people deserve to be recognised for the hard-working entrepreneurial group that they are, and I really hope that they look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I think now we'll open up to the floor if you have any questions. Do we have a written mic?
No,
We did, but
No.
broke.
Okay, no worries.
We have a useless one.
So could you project? Okay, so we've got one in front. Any other questions? Okay, we've got one in front. Okay. So do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yes.
First of all, thank you all for coming. It's really interesting to hear what you're saying. So I work for Darren Jones, who's the MP for Bristol West. One of the things that we get people writing in most about is what you're talking about, is people who are excluded. Not if people that were self-excluded or they're campaigning like their friends and family members who've been affected by it. Like what we were talking about, we have a Labour Metro Mayor now who is starting to put things in place to deal with it. But we're still getting people writing in, and it's not just that the support's not there. I mean, they're not enough support there. It's that people, I don't think know how to access the support. I think particularly people who've been self-employed for a long time, they're not used to kind of accessing state support. It's just it's a new experience for them. So I mean, what would you recommend in terms of promoting awareness of the sport things that are available, both from experience of being self-employed and from a parliamentary perspective?
Thank you. And we have another question in front.
Hi, Phil McCauley from Labour Business. I was just interested in wondering what Labour would do, Phil. I know you're not allowed to make any financial commitments of any kind, but in the galaxy far, far away in a parallel universe, what should happen? How are we going to solve this?
solve what?
The inequality that we just heard about for the last half hour, have been excluded from being supported in the pandemic.
Thank you. And we have one more.
Yes, so I know Bill's come across this before and being told that you're not allowed to talk about IR35 within the Labour Party and being told to retract a tweet that he made about it. And yet we're still hearing that issue is being raised by our experts on the subject. So, and we had a meeting with Labour Business and IPSI, Musicians Union, Community Union, all of them are saying, get rid of IR35. So why aren't we allowed to put those words into composite motion that went to conference?
Okay, so let's just do that first round of 3 questions, shall we? And then we'll come around to everyone else shortly. Rebecca, would you like to start?
I'd love to start with IR35. Well, that's really interesting. IR35 is a massive problem. Actually, it's not IR35, I'm technically correct. It is now off payroll working because IR35 is tax 8 and the payroll is tax 10 in IT. So now the client has to make a decision, and because the client has to make a decision, it's much more difficult because they've got a much bigger tax liability or responsibility than the one contractor had. I don't know why nobody wants to deal with it. I mean, it's causing such a huge problem. Everyone talks about Brexit and COVID, but IR35 and off payroll is causing enormous problems. NHS, like frontline workers going through umbrella companies, IR35 have pushed all these workers through umbrella companies and they're being abused. And this has been, we've got some stuff out in the media on this. The government have come back and said they're going to set up a civil enforcement body. So that's going to go through the spending review, but that's still not going to solve the problem because they're not dealing directly with it. When I worked at the Treasury, I was told, don't touch IR35. So I was looking at small company taxation. They are small companies. It was exactly our remit. I mean, I did research it and I did push as much as I could, but it seems to be an untouchable area. And because HMRC don't directly have a minister, they tend to do what they like and nobody's challenging it. I don't know how to deal with IR35. Labour brought it in, incidentally. The Tories have carried on. So it's an existing problem and it's going to exist until somebody deals with the inequalities in self-employment as a whole.
Thank you. Bill, would you like to?
Yeah, well, Rebecca very helpfully gave me my way out of that question by saying to deal with inequalities with umbrella companies. I think that's exactly right. I think the announcements that Angela Rayner made yesterday are a very, very important step forward, which is the acceptance of that we address that inequality that you talked about. There's a strength through your speech, Rebecca, about how we treat, how we regard people who are self-employed, and recognising worker status at the same level, giving access to social security in its wide sense to people who are self-employed, what Angela announced yesterday. I think that is crucially important. And if we look at the pandemic, just as an example, the ability of, or the choice that so many people face, that stark choice between going to work or self-isolating, and the fact they couldn't get financial support because there was no sick pay because they were self-employed, was one of the really, really appalling inequalities in health and financial matters that the crisis highlighted, because as you said, we knew, but the inability to get sick pay, the inability to get access to those £500 payments was and remains publicly scandalous, and still calling for those payments to be in place for the reasons I said. But this isn't over. So look, we need to have that system where if you are a self-employed worker, you qualify for sick pay, you qualify for holiday pay, you qualify for maternity pay as well. And that's at the heart of what Angela was saying yesterday. It would help and would continue to help through the pandemic, and it starts to address some of the problems long term, adding to that pensions, of course, as well. It's something we debated at previous IPSI meetings, isn't it? It's really encouraging to see we're starting to get there as we move towards developing policy. I'm not going to comment further on IR35, but clearly we're making some steps in the right direction. I think it's very helpfully pointed out we've been in enough trouble. Saying I broadly agree with you in the past. Hopefully I haven't. Just back to what Darren. I mean, Darren is the chair of A's subcommittee, and Darren, I think, I'm not saying, has done really great work on this topic as part of the inquiries that the committee has carried out. I mean, my view. I mean, when I was a shadow minister, I managed to get it in 2017 manifesto. We didn't quite get it in 2019 because we had such a rush. Commitment to much greater business support, much greater access to the kind of advice, access to finance, to mentoring schemes that you see in America with the Small Business Administration. People in the room know my support for a UK version of it. I hope we will get to that point in the coming years. For now, that the very least we could do is have a small business commissioner. Why can't the small business commissioner signpost good services? Why can't the small business commissioner be someone who coordinates where there are good organisations like IPSI, like the Federation of Small Business, who are the good specialist professional advisors in law and in accountancy for small firms. The point is, it is really important we find a better way of telling people what's out there. Because for many small business and self-employed people, they just don't know what's available. It is completely fragmented. And that, in the end, is why I think having some central organisation you know to go to deliver the services. I don't think we want to go back to business. They're huge, they're bureaucratic, and cumbersome, and ineffective, I'm sorry to say. But an organisation that is there to signpost and coordinate, bring people together, probably to a credit in my way of doing it. Now, I'm not making, I'm in danger of making policy, that's not spending commitment. But that's something that's something I've worked on before, and I think that's what we do.
Thanks very much. So, would you like to respond? And then I'll take around 3 questions.
I don't think I'll get anything to add on. I want to 5 or something. But perhaps I can pick on your question about how to access the support. Are you referring to the actual support schemes or benefits or the ARG program?
I think all of it is
in terms of the schemes, what I do know is that when the newly self-employed were suddenly included post budget, that is, those newly self-employed who could actually access something, and that's a different point, but it certainly was not 600,000 that Chancellor asserted. We suspect it's a much smaller number, and there are reasons why. But there was some technical anomalies with accessing SAYS at that point. I don't know exactly what they were. I'm not self-employed. I'm a community director, so I never tried to access SAYS. I'm not familiar with the interface and all that, but I know that there were some actual technical problems that were reported to us quite regularly after that point. I mean, in terms of benefits, that's something that we very keen to train again, because like I referred to. These are people who, in the main, have not had to access welfare before. So it's a completely new scenario for people. So one of the things that we have done is actually talked through with people how to do that from our member welfare side. And I think one of the sort of anecdotal observations that we've made is the complexity and the length of time it's taking for those applications to go through. What can be done about that, or how we can help further? And all we can do is signpost and kind of direct people back. On the ARG grants, I think we have certainly found with the surveys we conducted that it wasn't, for a lot of people, they didn't even know that they were there, or what they were, or how they could access them. For those that did try to access them, in the main, it was businesses that were home-based, mobile businesses, those without premises, that really suffered. And because the Treasury sort of gave that discretion to local councils to decide how they were going to, dish out that funding, the result was a complete postal lottery. So some people who are home and mobile based businesses were able to access it in some local council areas, others not. And that disparity has obviously caused a lot of deep frustration and anger within the community, because why should there be that kind of discrepancy across the country? So that's something that we've done to kind of step in with advice on how to appeal, simply by helping people craft good letters to their local councils. And we have managed to overturn some decisions. Also, we've seen that people have grouped together regionally and tried to lobby their local councils. They've tried to get their local MPs involved, and we found that local MPs actually haven't been able to do very much, but have obviously tried where they could. So, I mean, these are difficulties that everyone is encountering in different ways. And as an organisation, we've done our best, but it never should have been our role to do that.
One very quick one about the excluded, that the excluded who were excluded during the pandemic are continuing to be excluded with the regeneration funds because they're using the same principle as during the pandemic as they are in the regeneration.
Okay, so we had one question from the question and finish which time for it. So would you have said that?
Hi, yeah, I'm from the Musicians Union, so thank you for mentioning us. So IR35 is here to stay. How do we make a stronger case for genuine self-employment? A lot of our members, we are the original gig economy. We're musicians, we live off gigs. How do we make that case as a union and as a Labour Party for genuine self-employment? And that's the way that people want to work.
So Bill mentioned how, one of his constituents was £10 away from being able to receive from
Yeah, we're very well.
Sorry. Bill mentioned how one of his constituents was £10 away from being able to receive government support. Now this is something that I've thought about a lot. Say you raised it by £10, then you would still have other people who are £10 away from receiving government support. And when you have 1.3 million people who are self-employed in the UK, how do you create a system that looks at everyone's individual circumstances, their rent prices, their mortgage prices, how many kids they've got, tuition fees, people that they care about? How do you create a system that's going to equitably make sure that the people who need help get help and that nobody's falling through the cracks?
Well, I was just going to say that there's a crowd who are talking about inequalities and so on. There are cases out there who were hit in the 2008 crash and who have never recovered, and the pandemic was the killer killed really. It's not a happy situation.
Okay, thank you. So there's another group start if we just keep cut off time so it's
Question. I think
Can I just say we were delayed by 15 minutes?
We were late coming in, so sorry.
I think from our perspective, the community who have been excluded as an organisation, I think it's the arbitrary cut-offs which have led to such a large range of exclusions. I mean, the total number of exclusions, if you look at every subcategory, it's something like 14. And it's astounding that the Treasury Chancellor put in all of these cut-offs that there's suddenly this cliff edge for those who fell out of not having 50% trading profit from self-employment or 50k cut-off for self-employment. And I'm just using those two as examples. So I think it all comes back to this point of fairness that I think has come up quite a lot in this discussion. What was implemented was not a fair system. And that's at the heart of it. It was an injustice, and it continues to be an injustice. And those cut-offs are what has led to this. So I guess it's finding a fair system that works for all who form this such a vital body of our business community.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the fairest way of supporting people is to, it does go to the point about breaking down the difference between self-employed. But there are ways of measuring, because of the digital nature of the way that income is recorded. You don't need to go back 3 years for tax returns. There were far more people who could have been included on the basis of a combination of employed and self-employed income using the Treasury's own systems. They chose not to do that. I think you said scenario in your speech. A choice was made. My sense is that the government tried to find
Can we keep it down a bit? We
can have that 5 minutes with Lane now by constant instruction if you want. We'll carry on even longer. But I'd rather not do that. I'd rather continue. Look, my sense is that the Treasury wants to limit the amount of money that they give out, and found the Excluded group and we need much again, where Angela's announcement yesterday is such an encouraging way forward. And it is about making the case about self-employment, whether it's musicians or self-employed workers in the gig economy, or freelancers, as IPSI represents, or a combination. And it actually is a combination, isn't it? In very, very different circumstances. This is a valuable part of the economy, as well as being people's ways of choice of how to look after themselves. And again, as we were saying earlier, very many people don't earn a massive amount of money for self-employment, but they are not drawing on state benefits. And that should be respected, it should be supported. And I think that as an economic and societal benefit, there's it would be the right thing to do to support people at a moral level. And just to this point about the 2008 crash, my family and business finances, I was running a business in 2008 until 2010 when I was at Harvard. Our business finances never recovered. Never recovered. And I got a very well paid job, which I'm doing now. As I said earlier, I'm lucky. I know an awful lot of people didn't. I've represented a huge, very sizable number of people who haven't recovered in the strict back by the banks on the back of the crisis. And I fear we are repeating that with regard to it. One of the things we must really watch for is that we don't get government encouraging the banks to carry out similar behaviour in recovery loans. So where these COVID loans go, I know at the moment the government's saying it's sitting behind them, but to make sure that continues and we don't see some of that similar behaviour we saw in 2008. Danger of opening up a whole further line of inquiry here, but I think that one isn't that one.
Very, very quickly to the end of that. Therein lies the problem. This is a
Give us a couple of minutes.
bit of respect as well. Therein lies the problem. You cannot expect businesses on a day-to-day basis to have to trawl through case law to try and figure out what the employment status is for tax purposes. So that's my answer. I don't know what the solution is, because until we have some kind of statutory intervention, we have to rely on the courts, who don't even understand it themselves. If you need any help,